The rain fell on Beirut not as a blessing, but as a punishment. It beat against the tin roof of the small room where Yara and her 5-year-old daughter, Layla, huddled for warmth. Each drop was a drum hammering the reality of their lives. Yara watched her daughter's sleeping silhouette, her angelic face illuminated by distant lightning. It was because of that fragile peace that she took a deep breath and swallowed her fear every day. For 3 years, since Karim had died in the conflict that tore Lebanon apart, life had become a succession of gray days and endless nights. Being a woman alone, without the protection of a husband or extended family, was an invitation to invisibility and contempt. She worked sewing in a small, stuffy workshop, her nimble fingers transforming scraps of fabric into dresses for wealthy women who would never look at her on the street. The salary was a bad joke, barely enough for the rent of that cubicle and for bread and cheese. Layla was her only light, her reason. But Yara's light was fading, consumed by exhaustion and a dull pain in her chest that she ignored, fearing the cost of a doctor. That night, as the storm raged, Yara made the decision that had haunted her for months. She couldn't stay any longer. The war wasn't just about bombs and gunfire. It was a silent war against hunger, against despair, against her daughter's stolen future. She would sell the last vestige of her old life, a pair of gold earrings, an inheritance from her grandmother, and use the money to pay a smuggler. They would head to Europe, to a place where Layla could go to school and Yara could breathe, without the constant weight of debt and danger. It was an act of desperation, a leap into the dark, but it was the only possible move on a chessboard where all her pieces had already been captured. She packed a small bag with 2 changes of clothes, Layla's teddy bear, and a faded photo of Karim. The plan was to meet the smuggler, a man named Basil, at the port after midnight. The rain was her cloak, her ally. He kissed Layla's forehead, his heart a knot of guilt and hope. "For you, Hayati," he whispered, his voice a thread in the roar of the storm. "Everything for you." She grabbed her bag, took one last look at the room that had been her prison and her refuge, and plunged into the soaked night, each step a break with a painful past, and a plunge into an uncertain future. The city was deserted, the streets transformed into turbulent rivers. She was running, the bag clutched to her chest, the water soaking her worn shoes. The wind howled like a chorus of demons, and Yara felt a chill that wasn't from the rain run down her spine. She was almost there. The silhouette of the port warehouses loomed ahead, black against the even blacker sky. She was escaping. Or so she thought. The port was a labyrinth of shadows and smells, oil, salt water and decay. The rain created an opaque curtain, distorting the dim lights of the streetlights. Yara huddled against the wet wall of a warehouse, her breath forming white clouds in the icy air. Her heart pounded erratically in her chest, a tribal drum of terror. Where was Basil? He had been clear. "Come alone. Bring the money. Don't be late." She clutched the wad of dirty, crumpled bills in her coat pocket. That was all. Each Lebanese lira represented hours of work, disguised hunger, postponed dreams. A figure emerged from the deeper shadows, and she recognized Basil's hooded figure. His eyes were 2 black, impassive points. "Did you bring the payment?" His voice was rough as sandpaper. Yara handed over the money with a trembling hand. He counted it quickly, expressionless. "The boat is over there," he said, pointing with his chin to a fishing vessel rocking violently in the turbulent waters. It was smaller and more dilapidated than she had imagined. Hope, a fragile sprout in her chest, withered slightly. "Get in. Hide in the hold. Don't make a sound." He pushed her onto the narrow, unstable plank. Fear paralyzed her for a second, but the image of Layla, holding her teddy bear, propelled her forward. The inside of the boat was even worse. It smelled of rotten fish and gasoline. He led her to a hatch that opened onto a dark, cramped space in the hold. "Stay here. We leave in an hour," Basil ordered, closing the hatch above her. The darkness was absolute, suffocating. Yara sat on a rough, wet surface, hugging her knees. The boat rocked, and her stomach churned. She prayed silently, invoking the name of God, of Karim, of any force that could hear her. Minutes dragged on, feeling like hours. Suddenly, she heard loud voices from the deck. Men arguing. Then, the sound of heavy footsteps and the hatch being forced open. A flashlight blinded her. "Get out!" growled a voice that wasn't Basil's. Two rough men pulled her onto the deck. The rain was still falling, and she saw Basil being held by another man, his face bleeding. "A woman alone? Did you think I was an idiot, Basil?" The man speaking was tall, with a scar on his chin. He looked at Yara with contempt. "The port police owe me a favor. They'll love this prize. A refugee trying to escape illegally." Panic gripped Yara. It was a trap. Basil had tried to deceive the local mafia boss, and she was the bait. "Please," she pleaded, her voice a groan. "I have a daughter. She's everything to me." The man with the scar laughed, a dry, horrible sound. "That's not my problem." He made a sign, and the thugs grabbed her. She struggled, screamed, but she was like a bird caught in a net. They dragged her off the boat and threw her onto the concrete dock, her purse falling beside her, its contents scattering in the mud. The men drove away, taking Basil, whose fate Yara didn't even want to imagine. She lay there on her knees in the rain, soaked, humiliated and defeated. The escape had failed. She had lost all her money. And worse, she had lost the last spark of hope. The crying that followed was not silent. It was a howl of pain lost in the roar of the storm, the agony of a mother who had seen the door of salvation slammed in her face. She was broken. Totally and completely broken. Yara didn't know how long she had been there, motionless in the rain, transformed into a statue of despair. The pain in her chest was now like a knife stuck in it. She couldn't even cry anymore. The tears had run dry, leaving only a numb emptiness. Gathering her belongings scattered in the mud seemed like a Herculean task, an act that required a strength she didn't possess. Layla's teddy bear was soaked and dirty, a pathetic symbol of her failure. She stood up, staggering, her legs weak. The way back home was an ordeal. Each step was a burden, each passing car headlight a reminder of a world that moved on, indifferent to her ruin. The city was beginning to wake up, but the sky remained gray and heavy. She reached her building, climbed the stairs with the slowness of the condemned. When she opened the door, Layla was still asleep, an angel in a sea of misery. Yara took off her wet clothes and, wearing only an old bathrobe, went down to the entrance of the building, where a small family bakery, run by a Syrian man named Abu Hassan, was already opening its doors. She didn't have money to buy bread, but the warm smell was a small consolation, an anchor to reality. She sat on the entrance steps, huddled up, watching the wet street. It was then that a car stopped in front of the building. A man got out, well dressed in an expensive coat, but with a face marked by worry. He seemed disoriented, looking at his phone and the facades of the buildings. His gaze fell on Yara. He approached. "Please, can you help me? I'm looking for Fawad Shahab Street. My GPS isn't working in this rain." His voice was calm, polite. Yara looked up. She saw in him everything she wasn't: security, stability, a world of possibilities. A fit of coughing hit her, deep and painful, bending her in two. A pain in her chest exploded, and she clutched her chest, gasping for breath. The man Samir, his name was Samir, immediately knelt beside her, his initial concern replaced by genuine alarm. "Madam? Are you all right?" Yara tried to stammer yes, but the words wouldn't come out. She was pale, trembling. Samir didn't hesitate. He didn't question her, didn't judge her miserable appearance. He went into the bakery, and returned a minute later with a cup of fresh, steaming, heavily sweetened mint tea. "Here," he said, placing the warm cup in her icy hands. "This will help." The gesture was so simple, so unexpected, that it broke the ice inside Yara. She wrapped her hands around the cup, feeling the warmth penetrate her cold skin. The first sip was a balm, warming her from within. She couldn't remember the last time someone had been kind to her, without wanting anything in return. The tears she thought she had dried returned, now silent and warm, mingling with the steam of the tea. She indicated the direction of the street he was looking for with a nod. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice hoarse. Samir looked at her for a longer moment, his eyes capturing the depth of her suffering, the wounded dignity in her face. He nodded, a quiet gesture of understanding. Take care, he said softly, before getting into the car and driving away. Yara sat there, holding the empty cup, the warmth of the tea, and that small human kindness echoing in her numb body. It was just a cup of tea. But at that moment for Yara it was a lifeline. It was a reminder that humanity still existed, hidden beneath the rush and indifference of the world. She went upstairs to see Layla, and for the first time since returning from the port, she managed to hug her daughter without completely collapsing. That anonymous gesture planted a tiny, almost imperceptible seed of something she thought she had lost forever: hope. The next day dawned strangely sunny, as if the city wanted to wash away the memories of the storm. Yara had slept a restless sleep, Samir's face and the warmth of the tea mingling with the nightmares of the port. She moved like an automaton, preparing Layla for the day. The pain in her chest was a constant presence, a dark whisper she ignored. She would need to return to the sewing workshop. She would need to beg for an advance. She would need to find a way to survive another day, another week. The despair of the night of escape had now transformed into a heavy and painful resignation. As she helped Layla put on her least patched dress, she heard a soft knock on the door. Yara's heart leaped with fear. Could it be the landlord? Someone connected to Basil? She cautiously approached the door and looked through the peephole. There he was. Samir. The tea man. He was alone, wearing a different suit, but with the same serious and gentle expression. Yara's confusion was greater than her fear. Why had he returned? She opened the door, just a crack, protected by the security chain. Yes. Samir smiled, a small gesture, but one that reached her eyes. Good morning. I hope I'm not bothering you. I stopped by to see if you were feeling better. Yara was speechless. He had gone to the trouble of coming back? Why? She swallowed hard. I'm a little better. Thank you for the tea. I'm glad to hear that, he said, and then paused, his gaze taking in the poverty of the hallway behind her. May I come in? Just for a moment. Yara hesitated. Letting a stranger in went against all her survival instincts. But there was something in his posture, in his eyes, that didn't convey a threat. It was a deep curiosity, a genuine empathy. Slowly, she removed the chain and opened the door. Samir entered, and his gaze immediately fell on Layla, who was hiding behind her mother's legs, holding the dirty teddy bear. Samir's expression softened even more. Hello, princess, he said to Layla, his voice low and soft. He then looked around the single room. The unmade bed, the small stove, the peeling walls. Yara felt an overwhelming wave of shame. She saw herself through her own eyes. A failure, a wretch. Please sit down, she said, indicating the only chair, as she sat on the edge of the bed, pulling Layla onto her lap. Samir sat down, his hands clasped in his lap. He didn't seem rushed. I couldn't stop thinking about you after yesterday, he began, his voice carefully calm. You reminded me of someone. Yara remained silent, her body tense as a wire. My mother, he continued, looking out the window as if seeing a distant memory. She was also Lebanese. A refugee, many years ago. During the Civil War. She went through hardships. Alone. He paused, and Yara saw a flash of pain in his eyes. She always said that the kindness of a stranger on a terrible day saved her. A cup of tea, ironically. He looked back at Yara. When I saw her yesterday in the rain. I saw her. And I knew I couldn't just walk away and forget. Yara felt a lump form in her throat. She wasn't invisible. Someone had seen her. Not as a nuisance, but as a person. Someone's daughter. Someone's mother. The seed of hope he had planted the day before began to sprout, fragile and green, in his devastated heart. Samir watched Yara for a long moment, his eyes analyzing the paleness of her face, the way she sometimes unconsciously placed her hand on her chest. Yara, he said, using her name for the first time, after asking earlier. Excuse me for intruding, but are you in pain? The question was direct, full of a concern that was almost paternal. Yara tried to deny it, to shake her head, but another coughing fit betrayed her, stronger this time, leaving her breathless and with tears in her eyes. Layla began to cry softly, frightened. That was enough for Samir. This is serious. You need to see a doctor. Now. It was a statement, not a request. Yara began to protest, to talk about costs, about Layla, about work, but Samir was already standing. Don't argue, please. This isn't a favor, it's a necessity. We're taking your daughter too. The authority in his voice wasn't arrogant, it was firm and protective. It was the voice of someone accustomed to taking control in difficult situations. Before Yara could fully process what was happening, he had arranged everything. He called his driver, who was waiting outside. In 10 minutes they were on their way to Beirut's best private clinic, a place Yara had only seen from the outside, a world of marble and light not for people like her. In the car, the silence was thick. Yara felt numb, swept away by a current of events over which she had little control. Layla, delighted with the comfortable car, calmed herself, watching the city go by. At the clinic, they were greeted immediately. Samir spoke fluent Arabic to the receptionist, and Yara was taken to an examination room. She had hoped Samir would stay in the reception area, but he went in with her, with the doctor's permission. "If you don't mind, I'd like to stay," he said. And strangely, Yara didn't mind. His presence was an anchor in a sea of fear. The doctor, an elderly man with kind eyes, examined her. He listened to her chest, asked questions, his face growing progressively more serious. He ordered an X-ray. The wait for the results was the longest part of Yara's life. She glanced at Samir, sitting calmly in a chair in the corner, reading emails on his phone, but always aware of her, offering her a reassuring smile now and then. Finally, the doctor returned with the films. He pinned them to the view box, and Yara saw a strange white mass in one of her lungs. The world slowed down. "Mrs. Yara," the doctor began, his voice deep. "What you have is severe, untreated pneumonia. Very severe. If you hadn't come in today, well, it's not productive to think about it. The good news is that we can treat it. But you'll need to be hospitalized immediately. You'll need strong intravenous antibiotics and complete bed rest." The word hospitalized echoed in Yara's mind like a financial death sentence. She opened her mouth to say it was impossible, but Samir intervened. "Do whatever is necessary, doctor. For the best treatment available." He turned to Yara. "Don't worry about the costs. Please. Let me do this. For my mother." The look in his eyes was so intense, so full of silent conviction, that all of Yara's objections died on her lips. She wasn't accepting charity. She was accepting a lifeline. As they prepared her to be taken to a private room, an airy and clean place with a view of the sea, Yara looked at Samir, who held Layla's hand, promising her that her mother would be all right. The revelation wasn't just about her illness, it was about the nature of fate. The night at the port seemed to have been rock bottom, total darkness. But that darkness had led to the docks, to tea, and now to this man who, for reasons she barely understood, refused to let her sink. The turnaround was so dizzying she could hardly process it. She was scared, yes, but for the first time in a very, very long time, she wasn't alone. The hospital discharge came a week later. Yara felt weak, but renewed. The chest pain had disappeared, replaced by a lightness she barely recognized. Samir picked her up, with Layla jumping for joy at seeing her mother's face brighter again. But he didn't take them back to the damp room. Instead, the car stopped in front of a small apartment in a clean, safe neighborhood, with trees lining the sidewalks and children playing. "What is this?" Yara asked, confused. Samir smiled. "It's a new beginning." He opened the door to a first-floor apartment. It was modest, but it was a palace. It had 2 bedrooms, a kitchen with a working stove, a bathroom with constant hot water, and a small balcony. It was furnished simply, but tastefully. There was a new bed for Layla, with clean sheets. "It's not a gift," Samir explained quickly, seeing the hesitation mixed with wonder on Yara's face. "It's an advance. I have a proposal for you." He led them into the living room, where a brand new sewing machine, still in its box, leaned against the wall. "I know people in the textile industry. I bought raw materials. Your sewing is impeccable, Yara. I saw the dresses you made for the workshop. You can work here for me. Make custom pieces. You set your price. I'll just be your first client and investor. You pay me back when you can, interest-free. This apartment is included in the deal for 6 months, until you get back on your feet." Yara looked around, unable to speak. It was a dream. It was everything she needed, not a handout, but a real opportunity. A chance to be the master of her own destiny, to build something with her own hands, in a safe environment for her daughter. Layla was already running to explore her new room, her laughter echoing off the empty walls. That sound was the most beautiful music Yara had ever heard. She looked at Samir and words failed her. How could she thank someone for giving her life back? How could she thank him for giving her daughter's future back? She reached out and shook his hand, and the squeeze said it all. Gratitude, a promise, renewed determination. In that moment, in the sunlight streaming through the window of her new apartment, Yara knew her life had changed forever. The woman who had tried to flee in the rain no longer existed. In her place was a woman who had been found, healed, and now empowered. The chain of good had not been broken. It had a new link, strong and bright. The following months were the busiest and happiest of Yara's life. She worked tirelessly on her new sewing machine, creating dresses and blouses with the high-quality fabrics Samir provided. Her skill, once honed in the gloomy workshop, now flourished. She served a small but loyal clientele who appreciated her handcrafted work. For the first time, she earned enough money not only to survive but to live. She bought new books for Layla, who now attended a good school in the neighborhood. She stocked the pantry with nutritious food. She paid Samir the first installment of his debt, a gesture that filled her with deep pride. Yara's health was fully restored, her cheeks rosy, her eyes losing their former tired look. She and Samir had become friends. He advised her on business matters, and she, in turn, invited him to simple dinners, a genuine exchange that went beyond mere duty. Yara never forgot the promise she had made to herself in the hospital. She started small. She sewed clothes for the children of other refugee families in the neighborhood. She taught basic sewing skills to some women, sharing her abilities. Every gesture, however small, was a thread in the great loom of gratitude she was weaving. One day, walking through the market, she saw a young pregnant woman with a lost and frightened look, standing in front of a bakery, counting a few coins in her palm. Yara saw herself in that woman. The despair, the loneliness. Without hesitation, she approached. "Can I help you?" Yara asked, her voice now firm and calm. The woman looked up, surprised. Yara bought bread and cheese for her, and a cup of hot mint tea at Abu Hassan's bakery, who was now her friend. They sat on a bench, and Yara listened to the woman's story, a painfully familiar story. Yara didn't have an apartment to offer, nor a business. But she had an ear, a heart that understood, and a handful of money she could share. She gave the woman enough food for a week, and the number of a refugee support organization that Samir had recommended. It was an echo, a reflection of what Samir had done for her. A simple cup of tea. A gesture of recognition. A reminder that she was not alone. As she said goodbye to the woman, seeing a glimmer of relief in her eyes, Yara felt a sense of closure. The cycle was complete. She had been the recipient of kindness, and now she was its bearer. The refugee woman whom the world had tried to break had not only rebuilt herself, she had become a pillar for others. The failed escape at the port was no longer a defeat, but the necessary turning point that led her to the path where she truly belonged. A path of strength, dignity, and active compassion. A year had passed since the night of the storm. Yara was in her apartment, which was now officially hers, as she had paid the entire year's rent with her own money. She had settled her debt with Samir, a milestone they celebrated with a special dinner. Her small clothing brand, Yara Stitching, was gaining a respectable reputation. That night, she was preparing a small party. It was Layla's birthday. The 6-year-old girl was radiant in a new dress her mother had made for her, full of color and hope. The apartment was full of friends. Samir and his wife, Abu Hassan and his family, and some of the women Yara had helped. There was laughter, soft music, and the smell of delicious food in the air. Looking at her healthy and happy daughter playing with other children, Yara felt a wave of emotion so strong it took her breath away. She remembered the woman kneeling in the mud of the dock, hopeless. She remembered the piercing cold, the pain in her chest, the bitter taste of failure. And now here she was, surrounded by a community she herself had built, sustained by her own work, illuminated by her daughter's love. Samir approached, holding a glass of juice. He didn't need to say anything. His smile said it all. He had seen the seed he had planted grow and blossom. The promise to his mother had been fulfilled, and in a more beautiful way than he could have imagined. Yara didn't receive a material surprise that morning, as at the beginning of the story. The surprise had been the whole year. The surprise was her transformed life. The surprise was the discovery that no was not an answer that fate was willing to accept when kindness and resilience united. The gift of tomorrow, which she had so feared losing, was now in her hands, full of light, color, and the sweet melody of her daughter's laughter. The story of the Lebanese refugee was no longer a story of escape. It was a story of arrival. Of finally arriving home.